Welcome to the Artsy Raven, a show about writing, publishing, and the arts. With your host, the award-winning writer, editor, and publisher, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of the Artsy Raven, and today our special guest is Mily Mumford and Kai Sargeant. So Mily is a writer, director, producer, and scientist focusing on film, immersive theater, and new media. They have had over 20 works as a writer-director produced for the stage and have written and directed several award-winning shorts and music videos. They have a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience and a Master's of Science in Interactive Technology, and their scientific work greatly informs their creative work and vice versa. Kai, also known on stage as Kay, is the founder of Trans Girls, Raw and Uncut, and has solo produced the show for the last 3 years, in addition to hosting and where she's developed all the talent she needs for the show. And we're here today to talk about Trans Girls, Raw and Uncut, the movie, which is a feature-length documentary about all trans women comedy show that has become one of the most successful stand-up shows in Vancouver. Hot, heartfelt, and hilarious, the documentary features 7 comedians performing raw stand-up routines, giving up-close and personal interviews, unfiltered, behind-the-scenes storytelling. So welcome, Millie and Kai.
Hello, thanks for having us.
So can you tell us a little bit about how we ended up here? Like, what inspired both of you in a career in film and storytelling?
Well, I'll let Kai talk about the show, and then we can kind of talk about how I got brought on.
Hmm. Yeah, so the show was an idea that I had when I first started doing stand-up comedy, nearly 4 years ago now. That it was kind of coming out of the sort of Dave Chappelle, Ricky Gervais era, where it was really transphobia was really rampant in stand-up comedy. And so I had the idea when I started doing stand-up that I would be really cool to have an all trans girls stand-up comedy show, but we just didn't have the people for it. There weren't enough girls doing stand-up comedy. And so I started doing an open mic with the intention to sort of build the community, and the community built so fast. And then we started the show, and then the show took off like crazy. We had just an overwhelming response from the community and from like audiences coming to show out and support. And then since there, I've been just trying to keep the momentum going for the last 3 years. Yeah.
Millie?
Yeah, and so Kai and I got connected through actually the executive director, Eli Morris of the Vancouver Queer Film Festival, because Kai had this amazing show that was just absolutely exploding. And she was like, this would make a really cool documentary. And so went to Eli to be like, do you know any trans directors? I'd love to make this into a doc project. And Eli connected me with Kai, and we started chatting and hit it off. And then we brought in our producer, Aaron Perkart, and we applied for funding through Telefilm, which, if you're not familiar, is kind of like the big film funding body in Canada. And we got the Talent to Watch program. So we got funded through that. And then we were able to make our super cool documentary.
Now, both of you have quite different backgrounds. Like, has it sort of influenced the way you're telling stories at all?
I think the difference in background has been a really interesting thing. Just because I don't come from film at all. I come from like stand-up comedy and live event production. And so the way that I think about storytelling and narrative is a lot more, I think, contained within sort of a, I don't want to say like necessarily like a smaller frame, but I think that the one thing that I haven't really grasped is like the language of film, like from a visual medium. And so when I think about storytelling, I think about like a lot of the personal narratives, right? The kind of emotional narratives that people are going through almost from like their own um, like psychological sense. And so bridging that with Millie and then having those conversations about like those character narratives and then working together and like letting Millie really explore what that kind of looks like from a visual perspective and then also like feeding back into the narrative. I think it's been a really cool, it's just sort of like positive reinforcement loop of like building the things back together.
Yeah, I think because I am so multidisciplinary, like Kai and I have a shared language of like storytelling, but also like research, because we've both done research in different forms. That's like also a really cool crossover. And also, since I started more in theater, I've always been a very visual person. Like it's just when I'm seeing scenes, I'm always seeing images at the same time. I really like think in images. So when I'm thinking of like these sort of like deep character explorations, or when I'm thinking of a character in my head, whether they're fictional or real, I'm already kind of forming a visual language to it as well. So I think that's a way that kind of our different backgrounds really like intersect in a really cool way for documentary. I actually come from narrative film. This is my first documentary project. I'm usually doing science fiction and horror. Um, but usually from a queer, trans, and disabled lens. So social justice is a very important lens that I use in my work. So I actually, now that I'm in documentary, I'm like, oh, this is a really cool medium. But this was a project that I cared a lot about. So I wanted to try my hand at a documentary.
Okay. Now, I guess when you tell a documentary, you had a choice. Like we could have focused on the lives of the individual people, but instead of making the show like a central, almost like a character on its own. So, was there a deliberate choice to choose it, do it that way?
I mean, I will say that, I mean, Kai can also speak to this. We are really focusing on the community that Kai has built. So we are actually going really in depth into 7 of the comics and their lives, and really telling the story of the show that Kai has created through all these individual people, especially Kai as our lead subject. So I would say it's more using the show as a vehicle to tell these personal stories as opposed to the other way around.
Okay.
But Kai, I'll let you.
I think coming into it, when I first conceptualized like the idea of a documentary, even before I reached out to Millie, I had looked into the sort of landscape of comedy documentaries, um, and they were awful. They were, uh, I think one of the things that stand-up comedy as an art form struggles with is the sort of like idolization of the individual comedian, and the especially like it's typically men, it's typically like these men who treat themselves like they're on the vanguard of some like free speech social movement. And so a lot of the comedy documentaries have this very like, for the lack of a better word, like propaganda feel to them. Like they like it really does feel like they are trying to create these idols of men. And that was so antithetical to what we were hoping to do and what the community that I have been growing has been like what I hope to do with it, and where I really found inspiration, and then brought when I communicated with Millie, it really like came all together. It was through the language of like queer performance art films, right? So Paris is Burning is like the absolute like classic, but there's other ones like This Is Ballroom, um, where the art and the character and the individual narratives, as well as like the context and the community, all come together, right? Not one is more important than the other, but they weave together in like a very like integral space, which I think is very foundational to queer performance art, right? Like I think queer experience is so much tied to like performance and creating yourself like through yourself, right? And so I think you couldn't really separate that. And so I'm really like was really happy when like, and also why initially I didn't shy away at all from reaching out to someone who comes from narrative filmmaking, because I think that perspective of like narrative filmmaking as opposed to like strict documentary was something that I thought would be really interesting to explore, building this documentary through the lens of like narrative film, as opposed to like, oh, we're trying to document something real. It's like, what is real to us, you know? Like we're just creating nonstop already. Like real is already such a tense concept in my mind.
Okay. Now, while you were filming, was there anything that surprised you about anybody, or without giving too much away?
Yeah, I mean we're kind of still in the process of filming. You know, because it's a doc, there's many, you know, many different sections that we're doing. I think something that I was really excited about was just how well this sort of heightened visual style, it wasn't so much of a surprise, but because I am, like Kai said, coming from narrative, and we wanted to really treat this as shooting a narrative film with like really beautiful saturated lighting and a lot of like really amazing color and sort of forming a world around the characters that also really echoed the worlds they already live in queer performance spaces, as opposed to just sort of running around with a camera and no lights, like making it this beautiful spectacle. Um, Something that I was really delighted by was just how natural everything felt. Like it felt like instead of, you know, creating something artificial, it was like, no, this is just the world that we all kind of already want to live in as queer people. And, you know, we were really just like accentuating the beauty that was already in these spaces that we were filming in, that we're also like familiar with and love deeply. It just all came together in a really cohesive, beautiful way.
Yeah. And I think that this the thing that surprised me just as a non-filmmaker was showing up to like the taping for the show and just seeing how much equipment was involved. I was like, oh, there's like a 40-foot truck and a van full of equipment. I was like, this is a crazy production. I'm used to like stand-up comedy where I show up with a microphone and just stand on stage. So it was a very cool experience for me to be on a film set and just be like, wow, there's a lot going on. I'm gonna go sit over there and don't touch anything.
And yeah, and for me, it was like because, you know, we were filming in a space that I had done like drag performance and stuff, you know. It was funny to like bring my film world kind of descending into this like queer performance space world, and it was like two worlds colliding a lot of the time. But it was really cool to see that happen.
Okay. Now, what type of misconceptions about trans people do you hope this documentary challenges?
All of them.
All of them.
When I say that, I don't mean that like I'm not just being cute necessarily, although there is okay, I'm just like a little bit. Um, but I think the thing that has always struck me with producing a show that is all trans women is find very quickly when watching a show where there's seven trans women performers that every single one of them is so extraordinarily different.
Mm,
They're so little superficial, like anything tying them together, that the idea of even like, you know, what misconceptions do you want to break? It's like all of them, because once you recognize and reckon with the reality that all of the people that are being depicted on stage, being depicted on film, have such unique experiences, such unique backgrounds, such distinct lives from each other. I think the idea that you can put all trans women or all trans people into some neat stereotypical box like is really challenged. So whatever conception that you have, like maybe one of them might fit some of the aspects, but you're going to find really quickly that that doesn't hold for everyone, right? And so I think that broadening of understanding of transness beyond stereotype in the same way it's like, you know, what's the commonality between every woman?
mhm.
You know, the like sure there's some like really overarching stereotypes, but the moment you dig into them, it's like I think the model is untenable.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's this like it's almost a cliche at this point when we're talking about like portraying trans people on screen or on stage, where it's like, well, we just want people to see our humanity. But really, it's like, but that is really it. Like, there's a universality to it where someone is going to find something to relate to one of these women because they're so different. Everyone's going to find something in one of them to be like, oh, I'm exactly like that. And so it starts to like break down this like othering that, trans folks are, and especially trans women in a lot of ways, are experiencing in our current political climate where people want to, put people in boxes and not see people as people. But the more stories that we can actually put out there, hopefully the less folks will be able to do that.
Okay, so you say the project's still ongoing. Like, when do you hope to finish?
We're aiming to finish. Yeah, we are still in production. We're aiming to finish probably around the like late winter, early spring of 2027. And then we'll start our festival run. So we'll apply to a bunch of festivals. We'll see where we get in, and take the film from there.
Okay. Now, do you have any advice for people making their first documentary?
It's funny because uh, well, maybe I am the right person to say this because I know nothing about documentary and I'm, really going in the deep end. But I think actually a lot of the advice I have for people doing a doc is the same as someone directing anything, is like it's always a combination of planning and being able to improvise. And like really developing your instincts for, when something isn't working, immediately always having a plan B, C, and D to be like, oh, this thing isn't working exactly the way I was thinking it would. I'm going to pivot to this other way of doing it. And just being really flexible that way. And I think that's like especially important for documentary because you are dealing with real people and, real stories. And, the story is really shaped by whatever people are saying. But I think it's also true with narrative because there's always something that doesn't go as planned. I've never done a film project where everything works out exactly how you think it's going to, especially when you don't have a ton of money, which we, never do as indie filmmakers. So I think, yeah, the combination of planning and instincts and improv.
Okay.
It's
For
like comedy.
for people like that want to do a comedy show, do you have any tips for those?
Um, don't no.
Don't do it.
Unless you hate money, then I think for people who want to do stand-up comedy, I would say think about why you want to do stand-up comedy. If you're interested in getting up on stage and like being told that you're funny or validating like some sense of your ego, I would very much like I'm sure that there's a lot of that a little bit for folks, but I think the motivations of why you get into stand-up comedy are really important because it will shape your relationship to the art form and like your own relationship to art in general, right? I think stand-up comedy suffers a lot from people tying their ego to art in a way that diminishes the ability for them to make good art. Because I think so much of making good art requires you to learn how to put your ego to the side and channel around and through from like a very distant perspective, like an aware but sort of distance from your emotional capacity. um and then as far as like people who want to produce their own shows, my biggest advice, which I think is something that very few people in the stand-up world understand, and it might be crazy to a lot of people, is that the quality of the comedy is not actually what will create a successful show. Like the thing that will get people coming back to your show time after time is the community that you build with the people and the audience, right? I talk to everyone who comes into my door. I go introduce myself. I say hi. I build that relationship with the people who come to the events and the shows that I run, because for me that's the important thing, right? Like I don't think that that people like, yes, the comedy has to be at a certain level, and yes, we're like constantly developing people and constantly developing our comedians and pushing people in the craft, but ultimately like you as an artist are going to have the harshest like critical eye on the art itself. What people who are coming to see your art and see those things, like what they actually want is to feel a sense of community. They want to like have a good night out where they're connecting with something and connecting with people. And the last 1% on the craft is not always the thing that is going to get people there. It's the, did you shake hands with people coming in the door? Did you say hi? Did you smile? Did you ask them? Did you remember like a name or two? You know. I did have one more thing to add about just like advice for documentary filmmakers, but mostly just for people who are doing like any kind of qualitative, like, I mean, effectively what is research, is don't think that you can get away on the soft skills just by vibes. I think one of the big things that is really important to me, because I conducted a lot of the interviews, was like really studying interview methodology and like what makes a good interview. How do I like build rapport with someone, and how do I bring someone? Because if you are getting people to trust you with their stories, I think interviewing and like things that people qualify as like soft skills, there's this tendency to think that like either you're good at them or you're not. When I think the reality is like those skills are things you can practice and learn and develop, like just as any other thing. Like you can be as good as interviewing as you can, managing your way around like a camera setting, right? It's about practice, and it's about like really learning the technical elements of a soft skill like that. Um, yeah, sometimes I think they're just called soft skills so that men can pretend they don't need to learn them.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today, and good luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
The Artsy Raven is produced by Dark Helix Press. Introduction voiceover by Chris Gorman. Music by Tim Moore. Please access your bonus content on the Patreon website. Thank you very much for listening, and please stay.